I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. What would you do if someone you trusted for 40 years betrayed you? The old grandfather clock in our hallway, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked relentlessly as I sat alone at our kitchen table. The silence in the house felt heavy, like the morning fog that often blanketed our San Antonio neighborhood. This silence had become an unwelcome guest in our home lately. My husband, Richard White, had just returned from another business dinner. I watched him from the kitchen as he tossed his jacket carelessly onto the sofa, loosened his tie like it was choking him, and collapsed onto our bed without even bothering to shower. The faint scent of his expensive cologne hung in the air. But tonight it was mixed with something else, a sweet floral perfume that certainly wasn't mine. My signature rose fragrance was subtle and familiar. This was bold, younger, alien. I'm Nancy White, 56 years old, owner of a successful chain of bakeries across Texas. For 40 years. I've been married to Richard, built a life, raised our son Anthony, and worked my fingers to the bone creating my business from scratch. While Richard practiced law, I turned a small bakery into 7 successful locations. Minutes later, Richard's gentle snoring filled our bedroom. I moved quietly, picking up his discarded clothes with the practiced grace of a long-married wife. His wallet fell from his jacket pocket, and next to it, his phone screen lit up with a notification. I frowned. An email. Richard never used email, he always said. Nancy, all this tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call. But here it was, glowing like a warning sign, with a sense of dread that felt both wrong and necessary. I picked up the phone. The message was brief, but enough to make my blood run cold. You were incredible tonight, Dad. It was followed by a red heart emoji. Dad. Who would call him that in such an intimate tone? My hands trembled as I scrolled down looking for more clues. But there was nothing except a strange email address, a jumble of letters and numbers that revealed nothing. I carefully placed the phone back exactly where it had been and continued cleaning up. My heart pounded like a thief's as I checked his pant pockets before putting them in the laundry basket. My fingers found a folded piece of paper, crisp and new, a receipt from Morton's Steakhouse in San Antonio, dated that very evening. I stared at it in confusion. Richard had told me he was meeting clients in Dallas tonight, not here in town. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Richard hated driving to Dallas. He'd complain about the traffic for days afterward. San Antonio, however, was where his mother had lived before she passed away. He had fond memories here. The receipt showed a dinner for 2, an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he'd bought for our 10th anniversary, and 2 steaks. I tried to remember the last time Richard had taken me somewhere this nice. Maybe for my 50th birthday. That memory, once treasured, now felt tainted. I snapped a picture of the receipt with my phone, a habit I'd developed from documenting everything for my business. Evidence, I thought, though of what I wasn't yet certain. The next morning, I woke before Richard. The sunlight filtering through our curtains did nothing to brighten my mood. I'd barely slept, the mysterious email and receipt weighing heavily on my mind. I made breakfast 2 fried eggs, toast, and strong black coffee for Richard. When he finally came downstairs, his eyes were still groggy and his hair disheveled. I have an important meeting today, he announced without looking at me, his voice husky with sleep. I'll probably be home late again. I nodded, forcing the smile. Where's the meeting? I asked casually, setting his coffee down. Downtown, he replied vaguely, taking a sip. Some new clients. He was so practiced at this, I realized. The easy lies, the casual tone. It made my blood run cold. How long had this been going on? All right, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Be careful. He gave me a light pat on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like an afterthought than affection, and left. The sound of the front door closing echoed through our home like a period at the end of a sentence. I cleared the breakfast dishes mechanically, my mind racing. After 40 years of marriage, I thought I knew Richard completely. Now I wondered if I'd ever known him at all. Later that day, at my main bakery location downtown, I found myself staring blankly at inventory sheets, the familiar scent of yeast and flour, usually so comforting, did nothing to ease my troubled mind. "Ms. Nancy, are you okay?" asked Maria, my assistant manager. Her concerned face pulled me back to reality. "Yes, just distracted," I said, forcing a smile. "Big hotel order coming up." After Maria left, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Eleanor Thompson's number. Eleanor had been my friend since I opened my first bakery. Years ago, she'd mentioned knowing a private investigator when her sister went through a difficult divorce. "Eleanor," I said when she answered. "I need a favor." Her voice immediately softened. "Nancy, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I took a deep breath. "Remember that investigator you mentioned years ago? Thomas Reynolds. I need his contact information." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "Nancy, is everything okay with Richard?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice catching. "That's what I need to find out." An hour later, I received a message from Thomas Reynolds requesting to meet at noon at Riverbank Cafe. "Mrs. White, please don't worry. I will help you." He wrote. The message was brief but reassuring. At noon, I walked into the small cafe with its worn wooden tables and the comforting aroma of coffee. I chose a secluded corner, feeling like I was hiding in plain sight. Thomas Reynolds was a surprised middle-aged with kind eyes and a simple light blue shirt. He didn't look like the private investigators in movies, but his calm demeanor was reassuring. I handed him a flash drive with the photos I'd taken. "This is all I have," I said, my voice unsteady. "I think my husband might be cheating on me." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. After 40 years, I couldn't believe I was saying them. Thomas nodded, reviewing each image on his tablet without expression. He made notes in a small notebook. "Mrs. White, I understand. I'll start following Mr. White this afternoon." I looked at him, struggling to hold back tears. "Thank you. I just want to know the truth, whatever it may be." Thomas nodded with a compassionate look. "Go home and act normally. I'll contact you as soon as I have anything." I left the cafe and walked through the downtown crowd, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. 40 years of marriage. A life built on trust, now crumbling beneath my feet. That evening, as I sat in my office at the bakery reviewing delivery invoices, my phone vibrated. A message from Thomas Reynolds. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The image showed Richard in his light blue dress shirt entering an upscale restaurant, holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in, and my heart stopped. It was Olivia, my daughter-in-law, Anthony's wife of 3 years. I sank into my chair, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. Olivia, how was this possible? At family gatherings, she and Richard barely spoke to each other. They seemed almost uncomfortable in each other's presence. I now realized it had all been an act, a performance for my benefit, for Anthony's benefit. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they sat in a secluded corner of the restaurant, the table decorated with candles. Olivia was leaning toward Richard, smiling intimately. Richard was toasting her, his expression tender and adoring. I stared at the photo, a crushing pain in my chest. In 40 years of marriage, Richard had never looked at me that way, not even when we were young and first in love. It was a look of pure devotion, and it was directed at our son's wife. In the middle of the night, a video arrived from Thomas. The clock read 2:00 a.m. I put on headphones and pressed play. In the video, Olivia leaned close to Richard's ear, whispering something that made him laugh loudly, a carefree sound I hadn't heard in years. Her voice was sweet, her eyes sparkling under the restaurant lights. Then they left together, Richard opening the car door for her with old-fashioned gallantry. I replayed the video several times, each viewing like another knife to my heart. Olivia, whom I had welcomed into our family, whom I had taught our family recipes and treated like a daughter, and Richard, the man I had given my entire life to. What were they doing behind my back? Behind Anthony's back? I saved everything to a secure folder, making note of every detailed date, time, location. My hands moved automatically while my mind reeled in shock. I couldn't believe that Richard and Olivia would be capable of something so cruel, but the evidence was undeniable. I stayed in the bakery that night, surrounded by the sweet scent of pastries that usually brought me comfort. I remembered the early days of the business, when Richard would help me carry bags of flour, when we would laugh together in the small kitchen, our dreams as big as the Texas sky. Now it all seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie. The next morning, I was at the bakery early, mechanically preparing dough for the day's baking. The familiar routine helped calm my shattered nerves, but my mind kept returning to those images of Richard and Olivia. My phone vibrated. Another message from Thomas. "Mrs. White, I'm sending you more evidence." With a deep breath, I opened the message. A series of photos appeared. The first showed Richard and Olivia leaving a law office near the main plaza. Olivia wore a beige dress, her hair in a high ponytail, with large dark sunglasses that almost covered her face, a pathetic attempt at disguise. They walked close together, their body language intimate and comfortable. In the next photo, they stood in front of the Grand Plaza Hotel, a 4-star establishment with gleaming glass doors. I zoomed in, searching desperately for some explanation, some sign that would disprove what I was seeing. But there was nothing. Then came a short video. I pressed play, my heart pounding frantically. The shot was from a distance, but clear enough to see Richard and Olivia on a 3rd-floor balcony. His arm was around her waist, and she rested her head on his shoulder, her long blonde hair moving softly in the breeze. Then, like a dagger to my heart, they shared a quick kiss. It was brief, but it was enough to extinguish any remaining hope I had. "They also rented the room for the afternoon," Thomas wrote. "It appears they're staying the night. I'll continue surveillance." I set my phone down, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it into the bread dough. Just hours earlier, Richard had texted me, "Nancy, I won't be home tonight. Meeting a potential partner from out of town. Get some rest." It was all a lie, a well-constructed, carefully delivered lie. He wasn't meeting a partner from out of town. He was at a hotel with our daughter-in-law. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I remembered family dinners where Olivia would sit far from Richard, sometimes even appearing annoyed by his presence. Anthony would joke, "Mom, I think Olivia can't stand Dad. She avoids him like the plague." I had believed it too. I thought they just didn't get along. Now I understood it had all been an act, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. I replied to Thomas, "Thank you. Please keep watching. I need to know everything." That night, I returned to our empty house. It felt foreign now, a place of ghosts and lies. I printed all the evidence photos of Richard and Olivia leaving the law office, entering the hotel, standing on the balcony, and screenshots from the video. I sealed everything in an envelope and hid it in my dresser drawer, beneath old family photos. I looked at a photo of the 4 of us, Richard, Anthony, Olivia, and me taken at Anthony's birthday last year. Olivia was smiling, hugging Anthony tightly. Richard stood beside me, his arm around my shoulder, looking proud. Now, looking at it with new eyes. All I saw were lies. The next morning, just before dawn, I heard the front door open slowly. Richard staggered in, smelling of alcohol. "The partner was difficult," he complained, his voice raspy. "Had to drink a lot. I'm exhausted." I stood in the kitchen, watching his performance while feeling like he was rubbing salt in my wounds. "Rest," I replied calmly. "You have work tomorrow." He nodded, patted my shoulder, and dragged himself to the bedroom. Minutes later, he was snoring peacefully, as if he'd never betrayed me, as if he'd never gone to a hotel with our son's wife. When I was certain Richard was asleep, my phone vibrated with a call from Thomas. "Mrs. White," he said quietly. "I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used special equipment. They didn't notice. I'm sending it to you now." "Thank you," I replied simply. Minutes later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I put on my headphones, sat at the kitchen table, and pressed play. The first voice I heard was Olivia's, cold and calculating. Nothing like the sweet voice she used around Anthony and me. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want to have that whole chain of bakeries already. I want that old hag out of the house." I felt a blow to my chest. gripping the phone tightly. Then came Richard's voice, deep and confident. "Don't worry about the papers. Nancy doesn't know anything. Leave it in my hands. She trusts me too much." It felt like a knife twisting in my heart. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to take everything I had built my bakery chain, all my years of work, sweat, and dedication. I had started with nothing, baking from my tiny apartment kitchen and delivering to local cafes. I'd worked 18-hour days, missed vacations, invested every penny back into the business. Richard had never gotten his hands dirty in the kitchen, never worked the counter, never signed contracts with hotels. And now he and Olivia wanted to take it all away, to kick me out of the home I had made. I almost broke down, but found the composure to copy the audio to my secure folder, carefully documenting the time and place of the recording. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about my life's work. The next morning, as I made coffee at the bakery, my phone vibrated again. Thomas had sent another batch of photos taken with a telephoto lens. In them, Richard and Olivia sat inside his car with a thick stack of papers. Olivia had a red pen and was marking the document intently. Richard nodded and smiled beside her. "I overheard something," Thomas wrote. "They're planning to use a contact at the notary's office to expedite the transfer. I'll investigate further." I zoomed in on the photo. I couldn't read the text, but these weren't normal work documents. They were planning to steal everything I had built, step by step. I reopened the audio file and listened again. That old hag. That's what Olivia had called me. I remembered when she first joined our family, how I'd welcomed her, taught her to cook, hugged her like a daughter. I thought she was family, that she and Anthony would build a future together. And Richard, the man I'd loved since I was a girl, who promised to be with me until the end they had made a fool of me, a woman who still believed in love and family, Mrs. Parker, a regular customer, came into the bakery. "Nancy, your bakeries have been so busy lately. Your chain is expanding wonderfully. I'm proud of you." I forced a smile. "Thank you. I'm doing my best," but inside, I was shattered. What would Mrs. Parker think if she knew the truth? Would she see me as a strong woman? Or just a fool betrayed by her husband and daughter-in-law? That night at dinner, I sat across from Richard at our kitchen table. The yellow light cast strange shadows on his face as he ate and spoke in a monotone about his day. "Nancy, I have some important business papers to sign this week. Maybe you should look them over. They're a bit complicated." I picked up a piece of bread, pretending to take a bite. In my head, I could only hear Olivia's voice from the recording. "Dad, hurry up with the fake contracts." I knew he was testing the waters, trying to draw me into their scheme. "Yes, I'll look at them later," I replied, my voice deliberately tired. "I'm exhausted now." He nodded, took a sip of wine, and looked at me as if nothing were wrong. But I knew that behind that smile was a man ready to take everything I had built. Richard had a few more glasses of wine. His face turned red, and he started slurring his words about a difficult client. I nodded as if listening, but inside I wanted to scream. "Do you think I'm that stupid?" When he got up, staggering slightly, and went to the bedroom. I cleared the table. He collapsed onto the bed, snoring loudly, and left his car keys on the nightstand. I stared at them, my heart pounding. This was my chance. I entered the bedroom quietly, careful not to make a sound. Every step felt like walking between pain and resolve, between the past and an uncertain future. I grabbed the keys and went straight to the garage. The night was quiet, with only crickets chirping outside. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating Richard's SUV. I opened the door, the smell of gasoline mixed with a sweet perfume, Olivia's perfume. I opened the glove compartment and found a tube of personal lubricant with a loose cap and dried residue on the edge. I held it in my hand, disgusted. It was clear they had used it recently, a confirmation that Richard and Olivia were still carrying on their affair. I took the tube to the kitchen, washed my hands thoroughly with lemon soap, scrubbing as if to erase every trace of their betrayal. Then I opened the tool drawer and took out a tube of clear industrial superglue, the same kind I used to fix chairs at the bakery. It was a tool of my trade, now a weapon of my revenge. I carefully unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and filled the tube with the glue. Drop by drop, until it was completely full, I wiped the nozzle, shook it gently to mix it, and tested it slightly. It came out smoothly, just like the original lubricant. At a glance, no one would notice the difference. I replaced the tube in the glove compartment, adjusted everything just as it had been, and closed the car. I checked the trunk and found only crumpled bags, an empty water bottle, and an unused condom in the corner. My heart skipped a beat, but I wasn't surprised anymore. I took pictures with my phone, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. Back in the house, I returned the keys to their place beside Richard's alarm clock. I grabbed an old book and sat in the living room, pretending to read. The dim light fell on the pages, but I couldn't focus on a single word. My head was spinning with thoughts of Anthony, my son, who believed he was happily married to Olivia. How could I tell him that his wife and his own father were betraying us both? I thought of my bakery chain, of 40 years of work and sleepless nights, of all the arguments with Richard when he didn't understand my dream. He never really supported me. He was just waiting for the right moment to take everything. An hour later, Richard woke up and stumbled into the kitchen for water. He saw me reading and didn't suspect a thing. "Still not sleeping, Nancy Key?" he asked groggily. I smiled. "No, just reading a bit." "Finish your water and go back to bed." He nodded, drank, and returned to the bedroom, snoring again almost immediately. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. This man, who once promised to be with me until the end, was now planning to destroy what I loved most. But he didn't know that I had already started my counterattack. The next morning, I was in my bakery kitchen, kneading dough and preparing pastries for a large hotel order. I channeled my rage into every movement, pressing the dough with all my might. When I returned home for breakfast, I made an effort to appear calm. "Richard," I said as I served him eggs and toast, "I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow to sign a contract with a new partner. I'll probably be home late. Can you handle dinner?" I watched him carefully. He looked up, surprised, but in his eyes was something that wasn't concern. It was relief. "A big contract?" he asked, taking my hand with feigned tenderness. "Don't worry. Go ahead. I'll manage." But that spark in his eyes, that slight curve of his lips, he wanted me gone, and I knew exactly why. "Thanks," I smiled. "I'll call if I get back late." He took another sip of coffee, then got up saying he had to get to the office early. As he left, I noticed he'd forgotten his phone on the table. The screen lit up with a missed call. The name that appeared was at. My heart pounded. Allison Thomas. I was sure it was Olivia. Before I could touch the phone, Richard returned, grabbed it hurriedly, and turned off the screen. "Forgot it," he mumbled with a forced smile, and he was gone. I stood there watching the door close, feeling as if I'd been slapped. He wasn't even being careful anymore. That day, I worked mechanically, delivering bread, signing invoices, smiling at customers, but my mind was focused only on Richard and Olivia. I couldn't let them continue their deception behind Anthony's back and mine. That night, I pretended to be tired. "I have to wake up early tomorrow to catch the bus to Nashville, so I'm going to sleep," I told Richard. He nodded, patted my shoulder. "Rest, Nancy. Be careful on your trip." I lay down and closed my eyes, but remained alert, listening for every sound in the house. Close to midnight, when Richard's snoring stopped, I heard him get out of bed quietly. The faint light from his phone illuminated the darkness as he left the room. I followed silently, hiding behind the thick living room curtain. Richard stood in a dark corner near the window, phone to his ear. "Yes, of course. Come over to the house tomorrow. We won't have to go to a hotel anymore. Nancy has to leave town to sign a contract and she'll be back late." I heard a soft giggle from the other end Olivia's voice. "That's great. Dad, finally, we can relax," Richard laughed. "Yeah, come early. I'll be waiting." I stood frozen behind the curtain, my blood boiling. They weren't just cheating on me, they were planning to turn my house, my home, into their meeting place. I returned to the bedroom silently, opened a drawer, and took out Anthony's old voice recorder, the one I'd bought him for college to record lectures. I checked the battery, put in a new one, and set it to continuous recording. I hid it behind the bookshelf next to the headboard, certain it would capture everything. I carefully adjusted the cable and covered it with a family photo frame, the photo from Anthony and Olivia's wedding. Looking at it, I felt bitter disgust. Before returning to bed, I double-checked that the recorder was working properly. I placed the photo frame to perfectly conceal the cable. Then I lay down, pretending to be asleep. Richard returned to the bedroom, threw himself on the bed, and snored as if nothing were wrong. But my eyes remained wide open in the darkness, more awake than ever. I set my alarm for earlier than usual and closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare for the next step of my plan. I woke at 5:00 a.m. while it was still dark. The house was silent except for Richard's steady snoring from our bedroom. In the kitchen, I stared at a skillet of oil already on the stove. This was the final step of my plan, a simple smoke trap, but enough to expose the truth. I tied a thin string to the stove's igniter, ran it to the window, and attached it to a heavy coffee can I found in the cabinet. All I had to do was pull it from a distance, and the flame would ignite the oil, creating thick black smoke enough to alarm the neighbors without causing real damage. I opened the window by the stove slightly so the smoke could escape outside. I tested it once. The smoke rose quickly, forming spirals like a warning. I turned it off immediately, checked everything again, and made sure not to leave any trace that might alert Richard. I put on a jacket, grabbed my large purse, and pretended to be leaving for my trip. Before I left, I went into the bedroom and gently shook Richard. "I have to go to the bus station now," I said calmly. "I'm going to sign that contract. I'll probably be back late tonight." He opened his eyes and replied sleepily, "All right, be careful, Nancy. Call me if you need anything." Then he buried his face in his pillow and went back to sleep. I looked at the man I once loved and trusted, now lying there unaware of the trap awaiting him. I turned away, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. Instead of going to the bus station, I crossed the street to Mrs. Parker's house. She was my neighbor and friend for over 20 years. She opened the door, surprised to see me so early with my travel bag. "Nancy, what are you doing up at this hour? Is everything all right?" she asked with concern. I forced a smile. "Mrs. Parker, may I stay here for a few hours? I need to watch my house." She frowned but didn't ask questions. She poured me a hot cup of coffee and gave me a chair by the window. From there, I had a perfect view of my front door. Around 10:00 a.m., a taxi pulled up in front of my house. Olivia got out wearing a light floral dress and dark sunglasses, as if afraid someone might recognize her. Richard opened the door, looked around hurriedly, and quickly ushered her inside. I gripped my coffee cup tightly, my heart pounding. "It's time," I murmured, and turned on the app connected to the hidden recorder in the bedroom. The sound came through my headphones. Olivia's laughter, the clinking of glasses, heavy footsteps. Then Richard's deep voice. "All right, we don't have to hide in a hotel anymore," Olivia laughed. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is gone, right?" I bit my lips, holding back rage as I listened to her call me the old hag with such contempt. Then the bed started to creak, along with other sounds I didn't want to hear. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, "Just a little longer, Nancy. Just a little longer." A few minutes later, Olivia screamed. "What the hell is this? We're stuck." Her voice was filled with panic, almost sobbing. Richard growled. "Shut up. Wait. Let me see." I smiled grimly and activated the smoke trap remotely. The string pulled, the stove ignited, and the skillet of oil caught fire. Black smoke billowed out of the kitchen window in thick spirals, spreading outside like an alarm signal. Mrs. Parker gasped. "Nancy, your house is on fire!" I pretended to be scared, but inside I felt strangely calm. Neighbors started coming out into their yards, shouting, "Nancy's house is on fire! Call the fire department." Mr. Miller, who lived next door, quickly called 911. I remained seated, holding my coffee cup, my eyes fixed on my house. Everything was going according to plan. In my headphones, Olivia's voice grew more desperate. Richard, do something, I can't move, Richard roared. Don't scream, I'm trying. But I knew they couldn't do anything. The industrial superglue was already working, leaving them trapped in their most humiliating moment. I watched as the smoke continued to rise, getting thicker. The neighbors gathered, yelling in panic. Where's Nancy? Someone asked. She went out of town for work. Another replied. Mrs. Parker, standing beside me, looked at me with suspicious eyes but said nothing. She just squeezed my hand gently. I knew she suspected something, but I didn't need to explain. Just 10 minutes later, the siren of a fire truck sounded at the end of the street. The red vehicle sped up and stopped in front of my house. I saw Anthony jump out of the driver's seat in his fire chief uniform, his face tense. My son shouted firmly, "Get the equipment ready. There might be people inside." I looked at him and felt a sharp pain. My son, always so proud of his family, was about to face the cruelest truth. I wanted to run to him, hug him, and say, "I'm sorry, Anthony," but I had no choice. I stayed still, letting events unfold. The smoke from the kitchen continued to rise thickly, making Anthony and his team believe there was a serious fire. My son led the way with a sledgehammer, breaking down the front door. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the air. His teammates followed with hoses and extinguishers. I listened to the commotion through the recorder, Richard's desperate shouts mixed with Olivia's sobs. "Do something. Richard, I can't move." "Shut up. Don't scream." I bit my lips, squeezing the phone where the app was still transmitting audio from the hidden microphone. They were trapped, helpless, just as I had planned. Anthony entered the bedroom, and I could only imagine what he found his own father and his wife, naked, stuck together on the bed, their faces pale with pain and panic. Through my headphones, I heard Anthony's voice falter. What is this?" A firefighter behind him murmured in shock. "Oh my God." Another couldn't hold back a nervous laugh, but Anthony immediately shouted, "Silence." I knew that cry wasn't just to maintain order, but my son's last attempt to process his pain. The humiliation was now exposed not just to Anthony, but to the entire fire team in the neighborhood. A firefighter ran out and told my son, "Chief, the smoke is under control. It was just a small oil fire in the kitchen. Nothing serious." But Anthony didn't reply. I imagined the young man was still in the bedroom, frozen by what he was seeing. The neighbors began to gather in front of the door, pointing and whispering. "What's happening?" "It's Richard and his daughter-in-law," a woman shouted, her voice full of shock. Mrs. Parker, standing next to me, took out her phone and started recording, capturing Richard and Olivia writhing in bed, their faces contorted with pain. She looked at me with eyes full of understanding and anger on my behalf. "Nancy, you knew about this. Didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just nodded softly without taking my eyes off the window. Anthony came out of the bedroom. Through the headset, I heard Richard shout in a raspy voice, "Get everyone out of here. Close the door. Anthony." But it was too late. The whole neighborhood had gathered, their faces showing disgust, their whispers forming a chorus of shame. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in the act. "Unbelievable," a man exclaimed. "Poor Nancy. How did it come to this?" Another woman sighed. The firefighters, after a moment of hesitation, had to act. They wrapped sheets around Richard and Olivia, trying to cover their stuck-together bodies, and carried them out on stretchers. I could hear Olivia's broken sobs mixed with groans of pain. "Please, do something. I can't stand it anymore," Richard just mumbled weakly. "Don't let anyone see us." But the whole neighborhood had already seen. There were looks of revulsion, mocking laughs, and disappointed headshakes. They were carried out wrapped in a thin sheet amidst growing murmurs. "What a disgrace, father-in-law and daughter-in-law. My God, how disgusting," someone in the crowd said loudly. The crowd was still gathered at the entrance when the ambulance left with its siren blaring. Among the loud voices, I heard bursts of laughter. "What a show!" shouted Mr. Miller. "I can't believe there are people so shameless in this world." An old woman shook her head and whispered to the person next to her, "Poor Nancy." I stood among the people, pretending to be surprised as if I had just run there from the bus station. Anthony stood motionless in the yard, his arms hanging limply, his face pale as a ghost. His teammates avoided looking at him and quietly gathered their tools. I knew Anthony wasn't just shocked to see his father and wife stuck together in bed, but by the double betrayal of the two people he loved most. I wanted to run and hug him, tell him I was sorry for letting him see something like that. But I held back and walked behind Mrs. Parker, who silently accompanied me to the hospital. We sat in the third-floor hallway of St. Mary's Hospital, waiting in uncomfortable plastic chairs. I maintained the concerned expression of a wife who had just discovered her house had caught fire while she was away. Inside, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and heartbreak satisfaction that Richard and Olivia had been exposed. Heartbreak for what my son was enduring. Anthony stood by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. His broad shoulders, usually so strong in his firefighter's uniform, now seemed weighted down. He hadn't spoken a word since we arrived. What could he say? His world had been shattered in the most humiliating way possible. Hours later, a doctor emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked exhausted and slightly uncomfortable as he approached me. "Mrs. White," he said in a low voice. We managed to separate them. Fortunately, there was no serious tissue damage. They just need some skin ointment for the irritation. I nodded, pretending to be relieved. "Thank you, doctor. Can I see them?" He hesitated, then nodded and led me to the nurse's station where they gave me 2 tubes of medical ointment. The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at me with genuine compassion. "Ma'am, this is a very difficult situation. I'm so sorry." I gave her a weak smile, and the moment she turned away, I slipped the tubes into my purse and replaced them with 2 tubes of hot mustard I had prepared that morning, just another part of my carefully orchestrated plan. My hands moved quickly and confidently as I switched the tubes. This wasn't impulsive rage. This was calculated justice. I entered the hospital room with the mustard tubes in hand, feigning concern. "Richard, Olivia, are you all right?" Olivia was in bed, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She couldn't look at me. Richard, pale and drawn, struggled to meet my gaze. "Nancy, I can explain," he stammered, but I didn't let him continue. I placed the tubes of mustard on the table next to the bed and turned to leave. In the doorway, I paused and looked back at them, these 2 people who had plotted to take everything from me, who had betrayed not just me, but Anthony. "The nurse says to apply this generously to the affected areas," I said calmly, then walked out. Minutes later, gut-wrenching screams erupted from the room. Olivia's voice pierced the hospital quiet. "It burns, my skin is on fire." Richard's deep voice joined in. "What the hell is this? Who did this?" The entire hallway erupted in commotion. Patients and visitors emerged from rooms to see what was happening. An elderly woman whispered to her son, "It's them, the couple from the video. The father-in-law with the daughter-in-law. What a disgrace," another added. "They deserve it." The doctor rushed into the room, calling for nurses to clean their skin and apply a neutralizing agent. But Richard and Olivia's humiliation was already public, impossible to contain. Mrs. Parker's video of them being carried out on stretchers had spread throughout the neighborhood and on local social media. I stood in the hallway listening to the whispers, feeling as if the whole community was witnessing the downfall of these 2 traitors. When the commotion subsided, Anthony entered the hospital room with a thick folder in his hand. I had called him as soon as the ambulance left, asking him to retrieve the envelope with evidence I had saved in my drawer along with divorce papers I had prepared over the last 2 days. He handed me the folder without a word, his gaze empty. I opened it, took out the documents, and placed them on the table in front of Richard and Olivia. I looked Richard directly in the eyes, my voice cold but steady. 40 years of marriage ends here. Sign these papers, and then do whatever you want as long as you disappear from my son's life and mine." Olivia collapsed, sobbing, looking at Anthony. "Honey, forgive me, I made a terrible mistake. Please, I'm begging you, forgive me." But Anthony just stared at her, his gaze hard as stone, and left without saying a word. Richard tried to grab my hand, his voice trembling. "Nancy, listen to me. I didn't want this. It just happened." I pulled away, cutting him off. "Don't say another word, Richard. You chose this path. Nancy, please, he yelled desperately. But a nurse appeared in the doorway. Be quiet. This is a hospital. I turned and walked away without looking back. In the hallway, I found Anthony leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. I approached and placed my hand on his shoulder, but he didn't look up. Mom, he whispered, his voice broken. Why did it have to be Dad? Why her? I didn't answer. I just hugged him tightly, sharing his pain with my own. In that moment, I knew that Richard and Olivia had lost everything: their dignity, their marriages, even their scheme. But Anthony and I had also lost a family. I could only hope that with time, we would find peace. A week passed in a blur of whispers and sympathetic glances. My bakery had never been busier, a strange side effect of the scandal. It seemed everyone in San Antonio wanted to buy pastries from the woman whose husband and daughter-in-law had been caught in such a compromising position. Nancy, you're so strong, Mrs. Parker said one morning, holding a bag of freshly baked croissants. The whole neighborhood admires how you're handling this. I smiled and thanked her. But the truth was more complicated. People called me strong, but that strength came from the broken pieces of my heart. Every time I looked at the ovens where I had worked with sweat and tears for 40 years, I remembered Richard and Olivia, who had wanted to take everything from me and failed. Anthony had moved in with me the day after the incident. He didn't talk much about what had happened, but I noticed the change. He wasn't the cheerful, easygoing Anthony he used to be. His eyes now carried a wound that might never heal completely. Mom, I want to stay here for a while. He told me that first night as he arrived with a suitcase. I'll help you run the bakery, talk to clients, handle deliveries, whatever you need. I hugged him, feeling the warmth of the son I had raised, and just nodded without asking questions. I knew Anthony needed time, and so did I. Every morning we opened the bakery together. I prepared the ovens and arranged the trays while Anthony reviewed invoices and called hotels and restaurants. Mom, the Grand Plaza Hotel wants to increase their pastry order for next week, he called from the cash register, his voice calm but lacking its usual brightness. All right, I replied. Confirm the order. I'll prepare more dough. These simple moments gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. There were no more fake looks from Richard, no more calculating sweetness from Olivia. It was just Anthony and me taking care of what remained. Dinners were just the two of us now. We sat face to face in the small kitchen, eating simple meals, sometimes rice with beans and chicken, sometimes just sandwiches and coffee. Mom, can you make some flan this weekend? He asked one night with a faint smile, the first I had seen since the scandal. Of course, I replied, feeling a small spark of hope. But you have to help me stir the caramel. He nodded, and in that moment, I felt that we were slowly but surely recovering. Richard called several times that week. I let the calls go to voicemail. His messages became increasingly desperate. Nancy, please talk to me. I made a terrible mistake. I've lost everything. I deleted each one without responding. What could he possibly say that would undo what he had done? 40 years of marriage destroyed not just by infidelity, but by a calculated plan to steal my life's work. Olivia tried to contact Anthony too. She left tearful voicemails, sent dozens of text messages, and even showed up at the bakery one afternoon. Anthony saw her through the window and immediately went to the back room. Tell her I'm not here, he said quietly. I stepped outside to confront her. Olivia stood there in designer sunglasses, her hair perfectly styled, looking nothing like the disheveled woman in the hospital. Anthony doesn't want to see you, I told her firmly. And neither do I. Please leave. Nancy, you have to understand, she began, her voice breaking. I never meant for things to go this far. Richard, he manipulated me. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Olivia, I heard the recordings. I saw the evidence. This wasn't just an affair you two were planning to take my bakeries, my home. You called me the old hag, remember? Her face paled. You were recording us. Every word, I confirmed. Now please leave before I call the police for trespassing. She backed away, her facade crumbling. This isn't over, she muttered, but we both knew it was. That evening, as Anthony and I were closing the bakery, Thomas Reynolds stopped by. He looked different in the daylight, more approachable, less mysterious. "Mrs. White, I wanted to check on you," he said. "How are you holding up?" I offered him coffee and a fresh pastry. "We're managing. Thank you for your help." He nodded, taking a bite of the pastry. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, but I've never seen anything quite like what happened to you and your son." Anthony joined us, wiping flour from his hands. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Anthony." Thomas shook his hand. "Your mother is a remarkable woman. I'm sorry about what happened, but I admire how you both are moving forward." "We don't have much choice," Anthony said with a shrug, "but we're taking it one day at a time." After Thomas left, Anthony looked at me with newfound curiosity. "Mom, how long did you know before?" "Before that day," I wiped down the counter, choosing my words carefully. "About a week. I found some things that didn't add up, so I hired Mr. Reynolds." Anthony nodded slowly. "And the superglue, the smoke from the kitchen, that was all planned." I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, to my surprise, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Mom, I had no idea you could be so strategic." For the first time in days, we both laughed, a cleansing, healing sound that echoed through the empty bakery. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a call from Sandra Williams, my longtime attorney. I had sent her all the evidence Thomas had collected, including the recordings of Richard and Olivia discussing their plan to take over my bakeries. "Nancy, I've reviewed everything," Sandra said. "Richard and Olivia were attempting to commit fraud. They were planning to forge your signature on transfer documents for your business assets." I sat down, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Can they be prosecuted?" "We could pursue criminal charges," Sandra explained. "But that would mean a public trial, more media attention. Is that what you want?" I thought about Anthony, about the bakery, about my own peace of mind. "No, I just want this to be over. In that case, I've drawn up divorce papers that include full protection of your business assets and property. Richard will have no claim to anything related to White's Bakeries. Thank you, Sandra. Send them over, and I'll sign them immediately." That afternoon, I received another call, this time from Eleanor Thompson. "Nancy, have you seen the local news website?" My stomach dropped. "No. Why?" "There's a video of Richard and Olivia being carried out of your house on stretchers. It's gone viral locally." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I'll check it." Sure enough, the video was the top story on the San Antonio Community News site. The headline read, "Local Scandal Prominent Attorney Caught with Daughter-in-Law." The comments section was filled with a mix of outrage, mockery, and sympathy for Anthony and me. I showed it to Anthony when he returned from deliveries. He watched it without expression, then handed the phone back to me. "Does it bother you that it's public?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "Everyone already knows. Maybe it's better this way, no more secrets, no more lies." Later that evening, as we were preparing to close the bakery, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see Richard standing there, looking years older than he had just weeks ago. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, dark circles under his eyes. Anthony immediately moved to stand between us, his posture protective. "Dad, you shouldn't be here." Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I nodded to Anthony. "It's okay. I'll hear what he has to say." Anthony hesitated, then stepped aside, though he remained close by, arms crossed. Richard approached the counter but maintained his distance. "Nancy, I know nothing I say can undo what I did, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." "Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" I asked, my voice steady. He flinched. "Both, I suppose. But mostly I'm sorry for betraying you after 40 years. You deserved better." "Yes, I did," I agreed. "And so did Anthony." Richard glanced at our son, pain etched across his face. "Anthony, Don't." Anthony cut him off. "I'm not ready to hear it." Richard nodded, accepting this. "I understand." He turned back to me. "Sandra sent me the divorce papers. I've signed them all. The house is yours, of course. The business was always yours. I never contributed anything to it anyway." There was a bitter truth in his words. While I had built my bakery empire from nothing, Richard had pursued his law career, keeping our finances largely separate. "Where will you go?" I couldn't help asking. "My firm has asked me to take a leave of absence. The video, well, it's affected my professional reputation. I'm staying at a hotel for now. I'll probably move to Houston. Start over." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "What about Olivia?" Anthony asked suddenly, his voice tight. Richard's face darkened. "I haven't spoken to her since the hospital. Whatever was between us is over." "Was it worth it?" I asked quietly. "Throwing away 40 years of marriage, betraying your son, planning to steal my business. Was she worth all that?" Richard looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "No, nothing could be worth this." After he left, Anthony and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Do you think he's telling the truth, that it's over between them?" "I don't know," I admitted. "And honestly, I don't care. They're out of our lives now. And that's what matters." Anthony nodded slowly. "You know what the strangest part is? A part of me still loves them both. Dad raised me, and I thought Olivia was the love of my life. How do you just turn that off?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't? You just learn to live with it, and eventually, it hurts a little less each day." He squeezed my hand, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm glad I still have you, Mom." "Always," I promised. "We'll get through this, together." A month after the incident, life had fallen into a new rhythm. The bakery was thriving, whether from genuine support or morbid curiosity. Customers flooded in daily. Anthony had taken over deliveries and client relations, showing a natural talent for the business side that surprised us both. One morning, as I was kneading dough for cinnamon rolls, Anthony approached with an excited expression I hadn't seen in weeks. "Mom, I've been thinking we should expand the online presence of White's Bakeries." I wiped flour from my hands. "What do you mean, social media? A website where people can place orders for pickup or delivery. Maybe even ship some of our packaged goods nationwide." I considered this. My business had always been traditional word of mouth, local reputation, personal connections with hotels and restaurants. But perhaps it was time for something new. "You think people outside San Antonio would want our pastries?" Anthony nodded eagerly. "Your recipes are unique. Your pecan cinnamon rolls alone could be shipped all over Texas, maybe beyond." For the first time in years, I felt a spark of entrepreneurial excitement. "All right, show me what you have in mind." Over the next few weeks, Anthony worked tirelessly on creating a website and social media accounts for White's Bakeries. He took professional photographs of our products, wrote compelling descriptions, and set up an online ordering system. "Look at this, Mom," he said one evening, showing me his laptop. "We've already received orders from Dallas, Houston, and even as far as New Orleans." I stared at the screen in amazement. "All those people want my pastries," Anthony grinned. "They've heard about the famous White's Bakeries, and wait until they actually taste them." As the business evolved, so did our personal lives. I joined a cooking club at the community center where women my age shared recipes and stories. Many of them had experienced their own heartbreaks and betrayals, and there was something healing about being understood without having to explain. "Nancy, your flan is absolutely divine," said Margaret, a retired schoolteacher. "You must share the recipe," I smiled. "It's a family secret, but I might be persuaded to teach a special class someday." The women laughed, and for a moment, I wasn't poor Nancy whose husband cheated with their daughter-in-law. I was just Nancy, the talented baker, the woman with skills to share. Anthony, too, was slowly emerging from his shell. He continued his work with the fire department, but had taken on a larger role at the bakery. One day, he mentioned meeting someone. "Her name is Rebecca Matthews," he said casually over dinner. "She's a paramedic with the department." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart leaped with hope. "Oh, what's she like? Smart, dedicated. She loves to read historical novels and hike on weekends." He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "We're just friends." "Of course," I agreed, hiding a smile. "Friends is good. A week later, he asked if he could invite Rebecca to Sunday dinner. I spent the entire day preparing, making my best dishes and baking a special chocolate cake. Rebecca turned out to be a lovely woman, warm, intelligent, with a quick laugh and kind eyes. She helped me in the kitchen without being asked and genuinely seemed interested in my stories about starting the bakery. "Mrs. White, these empanadas are incredible," she said, taking a second helping. "Anthony told me you're a genius in the kitchen, but I had no idea. Please, call me Nancy," I insisted. "And thank you. They're Anthony's favorite." As I watched them together, the way Anthony's eyes lit up when Rebecca spoke, how their hands brushed accidentally when reaching for the salt, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life goes on, hearts heal, new beginnings emerge from endings. After Rebecca left, Anthony helped me with the dishes. "What did you think?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I think she's wonderful," I answered honestly. "And I think she thinks you're wonderful too." He blushed slightly. "It's still early, after everything with Olivia. I'm taking things slow. That's wise," I agreed. "But don't let fear keep you from being happy. Anthony, not everyone is like Olivia." He nodded thoughtfully. "I know. And Rebecca is different. Real." That night, as I lay in bed alone in the master bedroom I had once shared with Richard, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The betrayal had been devastating, but from those ashes, something new was emerging. Anthony was finding his way forward. The bakery was growing in directions I never imagined, and I was discovering strengths I never knew I possessed. The pain wasn't gone. I doubted it ever would be completely, but it no longer defined every moment of every day. There were now moments of joy, of purpose, of connection that pushed the darkness back. I reached for my phone and opened the secure folder where I'd saved all the evidence Thomas had collected. With a deep breath, I deleted all the photos, the recordings, everything. I didn't need them anymore. They belonged to a chapter that was closing. The next morning, as I opened the bakery, Mrs. Parker came in with a newspaper. "Nancy, have you seen this?" It was the business section of the San Antonio Express News. The headline read, "White's Bakeries expands to online market, shipping statewide." There was a photograph of the bakery, with Anthony and me standing proudly in front. The article detailed our history, how I had started with a single location 40 years ago and built it into a local institution, and our new venture into e-commerce. The reporter called it a family success story. Mrs. Parker said, beaming, "I'm so proud of you both." I scanned the article, emotion welling up in my throat. There was a quote from Anthony, "My mother built this business through hard work, dedication, and uncompromising quality. I'm honored to help take her vision to the next level." Later that day, I received a text message from Richard. "Saw the article. Congratulations. Nancy, you always were the strongest of us." I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing a simple thank you and putting the phone away. That evening, as Anthony and I closed up the bakery, I found myself humming something I hadn't done in months. "You seem happy, Mom," Anthony observed. I smiled at my son. "I am. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely happy in this moment." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Me too. Who would have thought?" Huh. Who indeed? From the depths of betrayal, we had somehow found our way to this new shore. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more healing needed, but for the first time, I truly believed we would be okay. As we locked the bakery door, I looked up at the sign, White's Bakeries, Est 1983. My life's work, still standing, still thriving, not despite what had happened, but in some strange way, because of it. The betrayal had forced change, and that change, painful as it was, had opened doors I never knew existed. "Ready to go home?" Anthony asked. Home. Yes, that too had changed meaning. It wasn't the house I had shared with Richard for decades, though I still lived there. Home was now where Anthony and I shared meals and plans, where we laughed and sometimes cried, where we were rebuilding, one day at a time. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it in every possible way. 6 weeks after the incident, just when life seemed to be settling into its new pattern, I received a certified letter. It was from Benson and Associates, a law firm I didn't recognize. With a sense of foreboding, I opened it at the kitchen table. "Dear Mrs. White," it began formally, "this letter is to inform you that our client, Mrs. Olivia White, is filing a lawsuit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress, assault, and damages related to the events of July 15th, 2023. My hands began to shake. The letter continued, detailing how I had, maliciously and with premeditation, replaced personal lubricant with industrial adhesive, causing severe physical pain, public humiliation, and lasting psychological trauma. Olivia was seeking $500,000 in damages. When Anthony came home from his shift at the fire station, I wordlessly handed him the letter. His face darkened as he read. "This is unbelievable," he growled. "After what she did to us, she's suing you." I sank into a chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 56 years. "She must be desperate for money, or revenge." Anthony paced the kitchen. "I'll call Sandra right away. This is absurd. Olivia was planning to steal your business. We have recordings, evidence." "And how did we get those recordings?" I asked quietly. "By me secretly placing devices in our bedroom, by me setting up the situation where they were caught, by me replacing that product with glue." Anthony stopped pacing. "Mom, you did what you had to do. They were conspiring against you." "I know," I sighed. "But legally speaking, what I did wasn't exactly above board." Sandra Williams agreed to meet us the next morning at her office. Unlike Richard with his flashy downtown firm, Sandra operated from a modest office in a converted Victorian house. Her walls were lined with law books, and her desk was organized chaos papers stacked in precise piles that only she understood. "This is a complicated situation," she said after reviewing the letter and listening to our explanation. "Nancy, what you did could technically be considered assault. The recording devices you placed might also violate consent laws." My heart sank. "So Olivia has a case. She has enough for it not to be immediately dismissed," Sandra admitted. "But we have countermeasures. The recordings, while potentially problematic in how they were obtained, do reveal a conspiracy to commit fraud. That's a criminal offense." Anthony leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Sandra tapped her pen thoughtfully against her desk. "We countersue. We claim that Olivia and Richard were conspiring to defraud Nancy of her business assets. We demand that Olivia drop her lawsuit, or will pursue criminal charges and our own civil damages." "Will that work?" I asked. "It might. Olivia has more to lose here than you do. Nancy, a fraud conviction could impact her future employment, possibly even result in jail time. Your actions, while extreme, were a response to a genuine threat." Anthony squeezed my hand. "We're not backing down, Mom, not after what they tried to do to you." That evening, as we closed the bakery, Rebecca stopped by. She had become a regular presence in our lives, often bringing coffee for Anthony during his early morning shifts at the bakery. "Anthony told me about the lawsuit," she said, helping me wipe down the counters. "How are you holding up?" I managed a tired smile. "One day at a time. It's just, I thought it was over. You know that we could move forward." Rebecca nodded sympathetically. "Some people can't let go. Olivia sounds like one of them. The worst part," I confessed, "is that a small part of me feels guilty. Not for exposing them, they deserved that, but for how I did it. The glue, the mustard. It was so calculated." "They were calculating to take everything from you," Rebecca reminded me gently. "You defended yourself." Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself staring at the photo I still kept on my nightstand, a family portrait from happier times. Richard, Anthony, and me at Anthony's college graduation. We looked so happy, so united. It seemed impossible that we had come to this. I picked up the frame and opened the back, removing the photo and placing it in a drawer. It was time to let go of that version of us. It wasn't real anymore, and maybe it never had been. The next morning, I was startled by a knock at my front door. When I opened it, I found Olivia standing there, looking much different than the last time I'd seen her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "What are you doing here?" I asked. instinctively moving to block the entrance. "I need to talk to you. Nancy," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "Please, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her in but left the door open. We stood in the entryway, neither of us offering to move to the living room. "I'm dropping the lawsuit," she said abruptly. I blinked in surprise. "Why?" "Because it was stupid and vindictive," she admitted. "And because your lawyer contacted mine about countersuing for conspiracy to commit fraud." I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle. "What do you want, Olivia?" She sighed, shoulders slumping. "Nothing. I wanted you to know that I'm leaving San Antonio. I've taken a job in Chicago. Does Anthony know?" She shook her head. "I thought it would be better coming from you. I've signed the divorce papers. They'll be finalized next week." I crossed my arms. "Why are you really here? Olivia, this isn't just about the lawsuit or telling me you're leaving." She met my gaze directly for the first time. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not that it changes anything or makes it better, but you should know that I regret what I did to you and to Anthony. And Richard," I couldn't help asking, "do you regret what you did with him?" A complex emotion crossed her face. "Richard and it wasn't what you think. It started as a mistake, became a habit. And then," she trailed off. "And then you decided to steal my business." I finished for her. She looked down. "That was Richard's idea initially. He said you didn't appreciate what you had, that he could run the bakeries better. I got caught up in it." "That doesn't excuse anything." "I know," she agreed quietly. "Nothing does. I just wanted you to know that I never set out to hurt Anthony. I did love him. In my way." "Your way wasn't enough," I said bluntly. "He deserved better." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, he did. That's why I'm leaving. So he can move on without the constant reminder." As she turned to go, I found myself asking, "Have you spoken to Richard?" A bitter smile crossed her lips. "No, he wants nothing to do with me now. Turns out he was using me as much as I was using him." After she left, I sat on the porch swing, processing the encounter. There was no satisfaction in seeing Olivia brought low, no triumph in her regret, just a sad recognition of how thoroughly we had all damaged each other. When Anthony arrived to drive us to the bakery, I told him about Olivia's visit and her plans to leave town. He was quiet for a long moment. "Good," he finally said. "It'll be easier with her gone." "Are you okay?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "I will be. It's strange a few months ago. I thought we'd spend our lives together. Now she feels like a stranger." "Time has a way of changing our perspective," I said. "Sometimes for the better." As we drove to the bakery, I gazed out the window at the familiar streets of San Antonio. For 40 years, this city had been the backdrop to my marriage, my business, my life. Now it was the setting for a new chapter, one I never expected but was learning to embrace. The San Antonio summer heat was beginning to fade as September arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn. 3 months had passed since the incident that had upended our lives, and each day felt a little easier than the last. I stood in the bakery kitchen early one morning, the comforting scent of yeast and cinnamon surrounding me as I prepared the day's first batch of rolls. The rhythmic motion of kneading dough had always been therapeutic for me, but now it carried an even deeper significance, a reminder that some things remained constant, even when everything else changed. The small bell above the front door jingled, and I glanced at the clock. It was only 5:30 a.m., too early for customers. "Mom," Anthony called. "You here in the kitchen?" I replied, wiping flour from my hands. Anthony appeared in the doorway, his firefighter uniform replaced by jeans and a casual button-down shirt. Rebecca stood beside him, her hand linked with his. "Good morning," I smiled. "You're both here early." They exchanged a glance that immediately sent my maternal instincts on high alert. Something was different. "We wanted to talk to you before the bakery gets busy," Anthony said, his voice a mix of nervousness and excitement. I gestured to the small table in the corner where I sometimes took my coffee breaks. "Sit. I'll make us some coffee." As I prepared the coffee, I noticed Anthony's hand rest protectively on Rebecca's lower back, the way she leaned slightly into him. They had been dating for 2 months now, growing steadily closer. Rebecca had become a regular fixture at our Sunday dinners, and I had grown genuinely fond of her. I set 3 mugs on the table and joined them. "What's on your minds?" Anthony took a deep breath. "Mom, Rebecca and I have been talking about the future." My heart skipped a beat. Was this what I thought it was? Rebecca smiled, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "We know it might seem fast, especially after everything that's happened, but we're moving in together," Anthony finished. "Rebecca's lease is up next month, and we've decided to take that step." I felt a mix of emotions: joy that my son was moving forward, concern that it might indeed be too soon after his divorce, relief that they weren't announcing an engagement just yet. "I think that's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Rebecca, you've been such a positive presence in our lives these past months." Her face relaxed. "Thank you, Nancy. That means a lot to me." "But," Anthony continued, "that's not all we wanted to discuss." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "We've been looking at apartments, but nothing feels quite right. And then we thought the apartment above the bakery has been empty since Mrs. Gonzalez moved to Florida last year." The apartment above our downtown location had served as rental income for years, but I hadn't had the energy to find new tenants after the elderly Mrs. Gonzalez departed. "You want to live there?" I asked, surprised. Anthony nodded eagerly. "It would be perfect. I could help open the bakery in the mornings before my shifts at the station. Rebecca's hospital is just 3 blocks away. And we'd be paying you rent, of course." "Absolutely not," I said firmly, then smiled at their concerned expressions. "I mean, you're not paying rent. The apartment is yours if you want it. But consider it my investment in your future together." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Nancy, that's too generous. We can't—" "You can and you will," I insisted. "That apartment has been in the family for decades. It would make me happy to see it filled with life again." Anthony hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom. This means everything to us." As they left to start their day, I remained at the table, sipping my coffee and reflecting on how much had changed. 6 months ago, Anthony had been married to Olivia, living in their small house across town. Richard and I had been approaching our 40th anniversary, living in what I thought was, if not perfect happiness, at least comfortable familiarity. Now, Richard was gone. I had heard through mutual friends that he had indeed moved to Houston and taken a position with a smaller law firm. Olivia had left for Chicago. Her lawsuit dropped, her presence in our lives fading like a bad dream. And Anthony was starting fresh with a woman who seemed to genuinely care for him, who looked at him with respect and affection rather than calculation. As for me, I was discovering that life at 56 could still hold surprises. The divorce had been finalized without drama, Richard accepting all my terms without argument. The bakery was thriving, our online business growing faster than we could keep up with, and I had found an unexpected joy in mentoring younger bakers, holding special classes at the community center twice a month. "Ms. Nancy," Maria's voice interrupted my thoughts as she arrived for her shift. The delivery truck just pulled up with the weekly flour order. I stood, pushing melancholy aside. There was work to be done, bread to be baked, a business to run. The past was the past. It was the future that now demanded my attention. 2 weeks after Anthony and Rebecca moved into the apartment above the bakery, I received another certified letter. This one was from Whitmore & Associates, Richard's former law firm. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, fearing another lawsuit. The contents were worse than I imagined. "Dear Mrs. White," it began. "Our client, Mr. Richard White, is exercising his claim to partial ownership of White's Bakeries based on marital contributions during the 40 years of your partnership. While the divorce decree granted you full ownership of the business, our client is contesting this on the grounds that his financial support and business guidance were instrumental to the company's success." I sat heavily on the sofa, the letter clutched in my shaking hands. Financial support, business guidance. Richard had never contributed a penny to my bakeries. He had never even worked a single shift behind the counter. The financial support had gone the other way. My bakery profits had helped pay for his law degree. his fancy car, our comfortable lifestyle. The letter continued, Mr. White is seeking 45% ownership of White's Bakeries or equivalent financial compensation. We suggest a meeting to discuss an amicable resolution before proceeding to court. I called Sandra Williams immediately, reading the letter verbatim over the phone. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. The divorce settlement explicitly stated that the bakeries were your separate property. Then how can he do this? He's trying to intimidate you. Nancy, he knows the business is doing well, especially with the new online expansion. He's probably in financial trouble and sees this as his ticket out. What do we do? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Don't panic, Sandra advised. And don't attend any meetings without me present. I'll draft a response and start preparing our defense, just in case this goes to court. When Anthony returned from his shift at the fire station, I showed him the letter. His face darkened with each line he read. He's unbelievable, Anthony growled. After everything he did, he's trying to take your business, Mom. We can't let this happen. We won't, I promised, though fear gnawed at my stomach. Legal battles were expensive and exhausting. Even if we won, the process could drain our resources and energy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the kitchen, making a pot of tea I didn't drink, staring out the window at the quiet street. How had it come to this? After 40 years of marriage, after building a life together, Richard was attempting to take the one thing that was undeniably mine, the business I had built from nothing, with my own hands and determination. At 3:00 a.m., my phone rang. Who would call at this hour? I answered cautiously. Nancy. It was Richard's voice, slightly slurred. Did I wake you? What do you want, Richard? I asked coldly. I got a new apartment in Houston, he said, ignoring my question. It's small, nothing like our house, no garden, no porch swing. I remained silent, waiting. The firm here, it's not the same. Junior partner instead of senior, lower salary. They don't know my reputation yet. Is there a point to this call? I finally asked. I miss you, he said abruptly. I miss our life. Everything's different now. I felt a surge of anger. You should have thought of that before you slept with our son's wife and tried to steal my business. That's what I'm trying to say, he continued, his words running together slightly. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But does one mistake erase 40 years? It wasn't one mistake, Richard. It was a series of calculated choices. And yes, some betrayals are so profound they do erase everything that came before. He sighed heavily. The lawsuit. It's not what I want. My new firm suggested it. They said I was entitled to part of the business. They're wrong, I said firmly. The bakeries were always mine. You never invested a dime, never worked a day there. You have no claim. I know, he admitted quietly. I don't know how to start over at my age. I thought maybe we could work something out. A partnership. A way back. I almost laughed at the absurdity. There is no way back. Richard, that door is closed forever. I'm dropping the lawsuit, he said suddenly. First thing tomorrow, I'll call Whitmore and tell him to withdraw. Why? I asked, suspicious. Because it's wrong, he said simply. And because I've done enough damage. To you. To Anthony. To our family. I didn't know whether to believe him. The Richard I thought I knew would never have betrayed me in the first place. Good night, Richard, I said finally. Don't call again. I hung up, unsure of what had just happened. Was it a genuine moment of remorse? Or another manipulation? Only time would tell. The next morning, I received a call from Sandra. Richard's attorney just contacted me. They're withdrawing the lawsuit. Did you know about this? Richard called me last night. I explained. He said he was going to drop it. I didn't know whether to believe him. Well, it appears he was telling the truth about that. At least, Sandra remarked. The withdrawal is unconditional, no settlement, no compensation, nothing. Relief washed over me. So it's over. It seems so. But Nancy, I'd still like to file some additional protections for the business. Just in case Richard changes his mind again, I agreed, and we scheduled a meeting for the following week. As I hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The business was safe, my life's work would remain mine. That evening, as Anthony and Rebecca joined me for dinner at my house, I shared the news about Richard dropping the lawsuit. "That's fantastic, Mom," Anthony said, his relief evident. "But why would he suddenly back down?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share about Richard's late-night call. I think he realized he had no case, and maybe he felt a twinge of conscience. Rebecca squeezed Anthony's hand. "Whatever the reason, it's good news. One less thing to worry about." Anthony nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Has he tried to contact you again?" "No," I said truthfully. "And I don't expect him to." Later, as we cleared the dishes, Anthony pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Dad called me yesterday too." My heart skipped. What did he want? To apologize, supposedly. He said he was sorry for what he did to you, to me, to our family. He said he was dropping the lawsuit because it was wrong, not because he couldn't win. "Do you believe him?" I asked. Anthony shrugged. "I don't know. He sounded different, defeated, maybe." He asked if I would consider seeing him sometime. "And what did you say I said I needed time? That I couldn't just forget what happened?" He looked at me uncertainly. "Was that wrong? Should I have just refused?" I touched his cheek gently. "There's no right or wrong answer. Anthony, he's still your father, despite everything. You get to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with him going forward." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "That's what Rebecca said too. She thinks I should take my time, not rush into forgiveness or a permanent estrangement." "She's a wise woman," I smiled. "You chose well this time." As they left for their apartment above the bakery, I watched them walk down the street, hand in hand, their silhouettes merging in the twilight. There was healing in that sight, my son finding happiness again, moving forward with someone worthy of his trust. And perhaps there was healing for me, too, in knowing that Richard had at least recognized the wrongness of his actions, even if it came too late for us. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler weather and holiday preparations, White's Bakeries continued to thrive. Our online shipping business had expanded to include customers in 15 states, and we had hired 3 new staff members to keep up with demand. One crisp October morning, I arrived at the bakery to find a familiar face waiting outside the door, Eleanor Thompson, my oldest friend, who had helped me connect with Thomas Reynolds months earlier. "Eleanor, what brings you here so early?" I asked, unlocking the door. She held up a copy of the San Antonio Business Journal. "Have you seen this yet?" I shook my head, following her inside and turning on the lights. "Page 3, she said, handing me the paper. "The Women in Business feature." I flipped to the page and gasped. There was a full-color photograph of me in the bakery kitchen, flour dusting my hands as I shaped bread dough. The headline read, "Rising to the Occasion, How Nancy White Built a Bakery Empire Against All Odds." "They interviewed me?" I asked, confused. "I don't remember speaking to any journalists." Eleanor grinned. "Anthony and Rebecca arranged it. They spoke to the reporter, provided photos, shared your story. They wanted to surprise you." I sat down, reading the article with growing amazement. It detailed my journey from a young woman with a dream to a successful business owner, highlighting the recent expansion into online sales. There was a sidebar about our community cooking classes and our commitment to traditional baking methods. Most surprising was a quote from Sandra Williams. "Nancy White exemplifies resilience and entrepreneurial spirit. When faced with personal challenges earlier this year, she not only protected her business, but found ways to expand and innovate." The article made no direct mention of Richard or Olivia, no salacious details about the scandal that had briefly made local news. It focused solely on the business, on my journey, on the legacy I was building. "This is incredible," I said finally, wiping away an unexpected tear. "You deserve it," Eleanor said firmly. "And there's more. The Chamber of Commerce has nominated you for Businesswoman of the Year." I shook my head in disbelief. That's for the big corporations, the tech companies, not small bakeries. Not this year, Eleanor smiled. This year, they're focusing on long-standing local businesses that have adapted to changing markets. The ceremony is next month. That evening, I hosted a small dinner to thank Anthony and Rebecca for the surprise article. They arrived bearing champagne and flowers. "You shouldn't have gone behind my back," I scolded, but couldn't keep the smile from my face. "Someone needed to tell your story, Mom," Anthony said, hugging me. "The real story, not the gossip, not the scandal, but the story of what you've built." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "The reporter was so impressed by your journey, from one small bakery to 7 locations and now nationwide shipping. It's inspiring. Nancy." As we sat down to dinner, I looked at these 2 young people who had become such an important part of my life, Anthony, my son, who had weathered his own heartbreak and emerged stronger, and Rebecca, whose warmth and integrity had helped heal those wounds. "I have news, too," I said as we enjoyed the beef bourguignon I had prepared. "I've been thinking about the future of White's Bakeries." They both looked up attentively. "Anthony, you've shown such a talent for the business side marketing, online sales, customer relations, and Rebecca, your organizational skills have been invaluable with the shipping logistics." Rebecca blushed slightly. "I've enjoyed helping out. It's been fun learning a new industry." "I'm glad to hear that," I smiled, "because I'd like to offer you both official positions with the company. Anthony as Chief Operating Officer, and Rebecca as Director of Distribution, if her schedule at the hospital allows for part-time work." Anthony's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, are you serious?" "Completely," I assured him. "I'm not getting any younger, and the business is growing faster than I can manage alone. I need people I can trust, who share my vision and values." "I don't know what to say," Rebecca stammered. "I'm honored, but I don't have business experience." "You have intelligence, integrity, and a knack for solving problems," I countered. "The rest can be learned. I started with even less knowledge than you have now." Anthony reached across the table to take my hand. "Mom, this means everything to me. I've grown to love the bakery these past months, not just because it's yours, but because I genuinely enjoy the work." "Then it's settled," I declared, raising my champagne glass. "To the new leadership of White's Bakeries." As we toasted, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was how family businesses should be passed down, with joy and mutual respect, with shared values and vision, not through deceit and betrayal, as Richard and Olivia had planned. The next morning, Anthony arrived at the bakery earlier than usual, eager to discuss his new role. We sat in my small office, reviewing financial statements and marketing plans. "I've been thinking about expansion," he said, spreading a map on the desk. "We have 7 locations in San Antonio, but none in Austin or Houston. With our online reputation growing, it might be time to consider physical locations in other cities." I nodded, impressed by his foresight. "That's been a dream of mine for years, but I never had the bandwidth to manage it." "Well, now you have help," he grinned. "Rebecca and I were talking last night after dinner. She's going to reduce her hospital hours to 3 days a week so she can focus on developing the distribution system. She's already researching more efficient shipping methods." A wave of gratitude washed over me. After everything we had endured, after the betrayal and heartbreak, we had somehow landed in a better place, stronger, more united, with new possibilities before us. As we discussed logistics and timelines, my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Nancy White?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is. Mrs. White, this is Jennifer Lawson from the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. I'm calling to officially inform you that you've been selected as this year's Businesswoman of the Year. The award ceremony will be held on November 15th at the Grand Plaza Hotel." I thanked her, trying to keep my voice steady despite my excitement. After hanging up, I shared the news with Anthony, who whooped with joy and lifted me off my feet in a bear hug. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said, his eyes shining. "Everyone will finally see what I've always known, that you're extraordinary." The weeks leading up to the ceremony flew by in a blur of preparation. Sandra helped me draft an acceptance speech. Eleanor insisted on taking me shopping for a new dress, something elegant but not stuffy, she declared. Something that says successful entrepreneur, not boring baker. We settled on a deep blue dress with subtle silver threading that caught the light when I moved. Rebecca helped me choose appropriate jewelry and insisted on treating me to a professional hairstyling on the day of the ceremony. The evening of November 15th arrived crisp and clear. Anthony and Rebecca picked me up in a car they had rented for the occasion, both dressed elegantly for the black tie affair. "You look beautiful, Mom," Anthony said as I descended the porch steps. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was decorated with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements. Business leaders from across San Antonio mingled, sipping champagne and networking. I recognized several prominent figures: the CEO of a major tech company, the owner of a successful restaurant chain, the founder of a healthcare startup. "Mrs. White," a distinguished woman approached, extending her hand. "I'm Melanie Davidson, chair of the chamber. We're so pleased to honor you tonight. Your story has inspired many of us." I thanked her, still slightly overwhelmed by the attention. Throughout the dinner, various business leaders stopped by our table to introduce themselves and express admiration for what I had built. "Your pastries are legendary," said one restaurant owner. "My wife orders your cinnamon rolls shipped to us every month for Sunday brunch." "I've been following your expansion," commented a marketing executive. "The way you've leveraged social media while maintaining traditional quality is impressive." When it came time for the award presentation, I made my way to the stage with uncharacteristic nervousness. Looking out at the sea of faces, strangers and friends alike, I felt a moment of unreality. How had I... Nancy White, who started with nothing but determination and a talent for baking. "Come to be standing here." The chamber chair read a brief summary of my career, highlighting the challenges I had overcome and the community impact of White's bakeries. Then she handed me a beautiful crystal award and invited me to speak. I approached the microphone, set my notes aside, and spoke from the heart. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," I began. 40 years ago, I baked my first professional loaf of bread in a tiny apartment kitchen, selling to local cafes from the trunk of my car. If someone had told me then that I would one day stand here as Businesswoman of the Year, I would have laughed in disbelief. A gentle chuckle rippled through the audience. The path hasn't always been straight or smooth. There have been challenges, setbacks, and yes, betrayals. I paused, meeting Anthony's supportive gaze from our table. But I've learned that resilience isn't about avoiding difficulty. It's about finding the strength to rise again when life knocks you down. I spoke about the importance of authenticity in business, about maintaining quality even when expanding, about treating employees like family. I thanked Anthony and Rebecca for their support and vision, Sandra for her guidance, and Eleanor for her decades of friendship. Finally, I concluded, I want to say to anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they weren't enough, your worth isn't determined by others' perception. It's forged in your own determination, in your refusal to give up, in your courage to begin again when necessary. Thank you. The applause was thunderous as I returned to my seat. Anthony hugged me tightly, whispering, "That was perfect, Mom, just perfect." As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the exit, Richard, in a dark suit I didn't recognize, watching from a distance. Our eyes met across the room, and he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. I nodded back, neither friendly nor hostile, simply acknowledging our shared past and separate futures. Then I turned away, linking arms with Anthony and Rebecca as we walked out into the cool November night, toward the waiting car, toward home. 1 year after the incident that had changed everything, White's Bakeries hosted a grand opening for our first Austin location. The mayor cut the ribbon. Local news stations covered the event, and customers lined up down the block to sample our famous pastries. Anthony, now officially COO, handled media interviews with natural charm and business acumen. Rebecca, as director of distribution, had developed a sophisticated system for supplying all our locations while maintaining quality control. And I, still hands-on despite my increasingly administrative role, had personally trained the Austin kitchen staff in our traditional recipes and techniques. "Mom, "Come here," Anthony called, waving me over to where he stood with a journalist. "They want a family photo for the business section." Family photo. The phrase warmed my heart as I joined Anthony and Rebecca. We stood together, smiling for the camera, three people connected not just by blood or marriage, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. Later that evening, as we celebrated in the small apartment we had rented above the new bakery, Anthony cleared his throat and clinked his glass to get our attention. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice slightly nervous. He took Rebecca's hand. "Or rather, we have something to say." Rebecca's face glowed with happiness as she looked up at him. "Mom," Anthony continued, "a year ago, I thought my life was over. My marriage had collapsed in the most humiliating way possible. My relationship with Dad was destroyed. And I was just lost." I reached across the table to squeeze his free hand. "But then something amazing happened," he went on. "In the middle of all that pain and confusion, I found clarity. I found purpose in the bakery, working alongside you, and I found Rebecca." Rebecca blushed slightly but beamed with joy. "We wanted you to be the first to know," Anthony said. "We're engaged," I gasped with delight, rising to embrace them both. "This is wonderful news. I couldn't be happier for you." Rebecca showed me the ring, a modest but elegant diamond that suited her perfectly. "We want a small ceremony," she explained. "Just family and close friends. And we'd like to hold it at the original bakery, if that's okay. That's where we first started getting to know each other." "Nothing would make me happier," I assured them. "And I insist on baking the wedding cake myself." As we celebrated late into the night, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the devastating discovery of Richard and Olivia's betrayal to this moment of genuine joy and new beginnings, life had a way of coming full circle, I realized, not in returning to where you began, but in finding new meaning in familiar places, in transforming pain into purpose, in rebuilding what was broken into something stronger and more beautiful than before. 2 months later, on a perfect spring day, Anthony and Rebecca exchanged vows in the courtyard behind our original bakery. Climbing roses and twinkling lights transformed the space into a romantic garden. Only 30 guests attended, close friends. Rebecca's family from Dallas, firefighters from Anthony's station, and key employees from the bakeries. I had indeed baked the wedding cake myself, 3 tiers of vanilla bean cake with raspberry filling and buttercream frosting, decorated with fresh flowers and a custom topper that represented their journey together. Eleanor served as my date for the occasion, both of us misty-eyed as we watched Anthony and Rebecca exchange heartfelt vows they had written themselves. "I never thought I could trust again," Anthony said, his voice steady as he held Rebecca's hands. "But you showed me that real love is built on honesty, respect, and shared dreams. You helped me heal, and in doing so, became my heart's home." Rebecca's vows were equally moving. "Anthony, you came into my life when neither of us was looking for love. But sometimes the best gifts arrive in unexpected packages. I promise to honor your trust, to stand by you in challenges and celebrations, and to build a future filled with laughter, love, and of course, plenty of baked goods." A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the guests at that last line. As the celebration continued into the evening, I found a quiet moment to slip away to my office. I needed to collect myself, to process the powerful emotions of the day. On my desk sat a small wrapped package that had arrived that morning, addressed to Mrs. Nancy White. There was no return address, but I recognized Richard's handwriting on the card attached. "Congratulations on Anthony and Rebecca's wedding day. May they find the happiness and honesty we lost along the way." Inside the box was a vintage brooch, a small golden whisk crossed with a rolling pin, set with tiny diamonds. It was beautiful and thoughtful, a perfect acknowledgement of my life's work. I pinned it to my dress without regret or resentment. The past was the past. Richard had made his choices, as had I. We had both moved forward in our separate ways. Returning to the reception, I found Anthony and Rebecca swaying gently to a slow song, lost in each other's eyes. Nearby, Eleanor chatted with Rebecca's parents, who had welcomed Anthony into their family with open arms. Mrs. Parker, my neighbor who had sheltered me on that fateful day a year ago, approached with a glass of champagne. I always knew you were a strong woman, Nancy, but this past year has shown just how remarkable you truly are. I smiled, touched by her words. I had help, I said, nodding toward Anthony and Rebecca. Family makes all the difference. Speaking of family, Mrs. Parker continued, have you heard the neighborhood gossip Olivia is engaged to some businessman in Chicago, and Richard has apparently started dating a judge in Houston? I sipped my champagne, surprised to feel no jealousy or bitterness at this news. I hope they're happy, I said simply, and meant it. As the evening drew to a close, Anthony and Rebecca prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Italy, where they planned to explore the bakeries of Florence and Rome, gathering inspiration for future projects. Don't worry about the businesses, I assured them as we hugged goodbye. Everything will be fine until you return. We know, Anthony smiled. You built something that can stand on its own. Mom, that's your real legacy. After they departed amid a shower of rose petals, I remained in the courtyard, helping the staff begin the cleanup. The fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a gentle glow over the remains of the celebration. Thomas Reynolds, who had been invited at my insistence, approached as I was gathering leftover flowers to donate to a local hospital. Mrs. White, he said warmly, quite a different scene from when we first met. I smiled, remembering our clandestine meeting at that small cafe. Indeed it is, Mr. Reynolds. I never thanked you properly for your help during that difficult time. He shook his head. No thanks necessary. In my line of work, I rarely see positive outcomes like this. Usually, I deliver bad news. Marriages end, and that's it. But you turned adversity into something remarkable. Life gives us moments of choice, I said thoughtfully. When Richard and Olivia betrayed me, I could have simply collapsed in grief, but I chose to fight for what was mine, to rebuild, to move forward. And look what you've created. Thomas gestured around at the bakery, at the evidence of celebration and joy. A true empire of your own making. As the last guests departed and the staff finished cleaning, I stood alone in the quiet courtyard. From this very spot, 40 years earlier, I had looked out at an empty lot and imagined my first bakery. I had been young then, full of dreams and determination, with no idea of the journey ahead. Now, at 57, I was starting a new chapter not alone, but surrounded by a chosen family built on love and respect. White's Bakeries would continue to grow and evolve. Anthony and Rebecca would bring new ideas, new energy, and I would guide them with the wisdom earned through decades of work and one extraordinary year of transformation. I looked up at the stars, bright in the clear Texas sky, and felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead been the catalyst for something better than I could have imagined. As I locked the bakery door and headed home, I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know what city you're watching from. On the screen, you can see 2 other stories that are channel favorites. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.